Hello, y'all, and welcome back. We've had a little week off, but we are now on the way to a triple header, the second triple header of this F1 2025 season. And we are headed to Italy and the old racetrack of Imola. But let's talk a little bit about what we saw in Miami over this last race weekend. Of course, the sprint weekend gave us a little extra time to see cars in competitive sessions. But again, it's always with sprint weekends, it's going to be hard to tell what the cars really are like because of the limited amount of practice time to get the car set up right. It's really more of a battle of who can get the car set up just right. And of course, it's always makes for a tough weekend on the rookies because they have to jump straight into it. But let's start with the top of the grid as usual and work our way down. Miami was a statement from McLaren. The Grand Prix finished 33 seconds ahead of George Russell in third. That's a pretty massive margin for a McLaren 1-2. In the sprint, it was looking like it was going to be a good opportunity for an Oscar win there, but some good fortunate timing of the VSC around the time that the tire crossover was going from wet to dries meant that Lando Norris got ahead of Piastri, and that was kind of job done. Realistically, not a huge loss for Oscar there. It's only 1 point less coming in second in the sprint, whereas in the Grand Prix it's 7 points, 18 to 25. Yeah, 7-point differential. And of course, in the Grand Prix where it mattered, Oscar Piastri did take home that win. Now, we've once again, though, seen Lando Norris kind of struggling with how to deal with Max Verstappen. Normally, I would agree with him. Starting on the front row with Verstappen, you got to go and try and get the lead from him. If it was any time other than now and in any car other than the McLaren. It's obvious how much better the McLaren is than other cars. Lando Norris cost himself several positions on that opening lap by trying to just fight with Verstappen on the way into turn one. I think realistically, no driver wants to let a guy have the lead, but the McLaren car is so superior, especially over such long runs. There's nothing in the sprint that really told him that would say that the Red Bull was going to be, impossible to beat around Miami. So Lando Norris, again, not really making the right decision. Oscar Piastri, a little more decisive in getting past Verstappen. And of course, later on in the race when Lando had to get by Verstappen, it took him a couple of shots at it. He kind of got baited into the same old tricks. And finishing only 4 seconds back of his teammate, I think if Lando makes those moves, more decisively and quickly and doesn't fall into Verstappen's games, just use the superiority of your car, he had better pace than Piastri at the end of the race. So I think that was a bit of a gift to Oscar for how Lando ran the tail half of that race. Of course, another, just kind of one-stop basic strategy. It did look like the alternate strategy proved to be a pretty good one based on what we saw out of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Both of those guys gaining quite a few positions. But yeah, Oscar Piastri grows his championship lead. And he's starting to get on terms with Lando. I think at late stage, still Lando has the outright pace advantage, and especially in keeping tires live. But Oscar's closing that gap, and he's making moves with his racecraft. We saw him early in the race fight with Verstappen. See, there wasn't really a way past. Dropped back for about 2 laps, cooled his tires, and then went on a very focused attack and got the job done right then and there. So I think Oscar has got the head on his shoulders and just thinking about, I don't want to say strategy as far as when to pit, what tires to put on, but as far as what he can do behind the wheel, when to attack, when to sit back, when to conserve tires, when to push, I think he's got the edge on Lando at this point. And, we're getting a part way through the season here. Luckily for Lando, it's looking like it's going to be kind of a McLaren v. McLaren World Championship. It's not looking like it was last year where they were fighting with Verstappen. In as much as I think if there was a third driver involved, the team at McLaren would have to make some choices. I think even, at this stage, a quarter of the way through the season, to say, nope, it's time that we need to bank points for Piastri or for whoever the championship leader is at that point. Use those team orders to say, hey, this is the guy we're backing. I think it's close enough though, and since it's only between the two McLaren guys, that McLaren's not having to make those tough choices at this stage. So next down the list, finishing P3 in the Grand Prix, George Russell. But the big Mercedes story, I think, this weekend has to be Kimi Antonelli and his sprint pole. We've known the kid is quick, and he's really showing that he can put it together. And George Russell is no slouch of a qualifier. He's called Mr. Saturday in his Williams days because he was putting that car so far ahead of where it should have been. He's out qualifying Lewis Hamilton pretty consistently in their final days at Mercedes. So, for Antonelli to already 6 races into the season be starting to take the fight to George in the qualifying format, I think is good news for the kid. The more he can sort that out, then he can start to do what Piastri's had to do, learn how to manage the tires. I think all rookies are going to have to go through that phase after they get the raw pace figured out to then figure out how to manage a race and the tires. Luckily, he's got Pete Bonington as his race engineer, Bono, which is just, a driver's engineer, tells them what you need and does a fantastic job. But credit to George Russell in the Grand Prix, a P3 finish for him, another strong weekend, managed to see him on the podium and, made the move past Max when he needed to later in the race. I do think that it's possible that the amount of tire that Verstappen was taking out trying to fight with the McLarens earlier on in his stints is kind of what did him in towards the end. I mean, he was way off the pace at the end of the Grand Prix, so it was an interesting one. And while we're talking about that, let's go ahead, since Mercedes is just kind of being Mercedes and looking good. Let's go on to Red Bull. And we've spoken a bit about Verstappen already, but let's talk about Yuki Tsunoda. Tough day on sprint qualifying, obviously getting knocked out in Q1, became kind of the sprint guinea pig, especially in changeable conditions, but that did net him because they put him onto dry tires so early to be a guinea pig, and the track dried up so quickly from that stage. Managed to pull in, a sprint point, and then in the Grand Prix, got himself into Q3 and scored a point there as well. So Yuki Tsunoda, still in the sessions that it matters, is still a bit further from Verstappen than I'm sure even Red Bull with their reduced expectations would hope. Because we've seen Yuki get right there with Verstappen's times in practicing and early phases of qualifying. It's just when it gets to that last bit, the Q3 and then Grand Prix race pace, is just not quite there. But it seems that each weekend Yuki's kind of having a little bit of a yo-yo. He finds some time, has some mistakes, finds some time, etc., and kind of goes back and forth. So I'm hopeful for Yuki. I unfortunately kind of see him, because of his big Honda backing, as much as they've said they won't stand in the way of it, I wouldn't be shocked to see Red Bull move on from him in the off-season when they go to, end their Honda partnership, go fully for Ford powertrains. I'm just worried for Yuki. I think he has the opportunity to do enough to retain that seat, but Red Bull is a bit of a powder keg, and you never know what's going to go on there. Who do we have next as I try and scroll over to my Word document? Williams. A double points result for Williams in the Grand Prix. Looking pretty good overall. The car definitely continues to be improving, especially, Albon, a P5 in the Grand Prix ahead of 2 Ferraris and a Mercedes. To that point, I think Antonelli realistically, Grand Prix performance-wise, probably should have been more catching up to the Williams than having to defend from the Mercedes, but we'll get into that a little more when we're talking Ferrari. But a P5 result for Albon, is a very strong haul of points for them. Of course, Sainz bringing home some points as well. In the end, Sainz is continuing to gradually kind of close the gap to Albon. He's struggling with wet weather, so I'll have to look and see what the weather forecast is for Imola. I don't know. But it does look like that every time Sainz is starting to close up, Albon takes up a big leap forward with the car. And the car is starting to look, pretty competitive. And if they can get a good aero platform on, that Mercedes engine is looking pretty good at this stage as well. So Williams is a team to keep an eye out for, really mixing it up to kind of be almost that guaranteed in the top 10 team. And if that's the case, it's going to be a lot of trouble for the rest of the back of the grid. Because at that point, you've got 5 teams that have pretty solid on pace to be scoring points every weekend. And when you have 5 of those, that's all points paying positions taken up. You're kind of relying on DNFs or chaos to get in. Usually you only have 3 or 4 teams that are kind of guaranteed points, and the rest kind of fight for those P8, 9, 10 scraps. But it's kind of looking like Williams might even be, at some circuits, ahead of Ferrari on raw pace. So let's talk Ferrari. The car is struggling. We saw Leclerc qualify P9 in the Grand Prix, Lewis P12, only separated by a couple of hundredths. So Lewis is starting to get at least, some of the qualifying on terms with Leclerc. He's definitely got some race pace still to find. But, afterwards, after the qualifying, Leclerc said that was it. That's what the car could do. And to be starting behind, 2 Williams cars, it's not a good sign for Ferrari. That car seems to be going a little bit backwards. I believe they have some upgrades on the way for Imola and Spain. So we will see what they can do to get this car figured out and hopefully trending in the right direction. It starts to become the question, when do they just call it what it is and move on to the 2026 car? I don't think they'll quite want to do that yet at this early stage of the season. But the big thing out of Ferrari is their strategy, their team orders. It just needs to improve. They made a smart call by putting their drivers on alternate strategies, the reverse strategy that Hamilton ran, starting on hards, then going to mediums for the second phase, was a good strategy. Moved him up four positions. We saw George Russell run the same strategy to a podium. But I think their indecisiveness and their lack of commitment to the driver swaps really cost them the opportunity to chase down Antonelli. Because out the gate, and I know Lewis's race pace has not been all that great, if you let Lewis go by right away, get him in front of Leclerc, and have him hold Leclerc in the DRS, I think that gives them a good headway into catching up to Kimi Antonelli ahead. And then late phase, you switch over and put Leclerc back in front, who's shown the better race pace, especially as Hamilton's tires fall off, and let him close that last couple of seconds, bring Hamilton along with him, and then you have kind of a 2-on-1 opportunity to chase down and attack the Mercedes. I think they waited three or 4 laps too long to do the swaps in both cases. So you essentially parked Hamilton behind Leclerc when his tires were at their absolute best, overheated him. So by the time he did get out in clean air, he had to then slow down to bring the tires back under control, then start going forward. And then same thing with Leclerc. It was obvious the pace was falling off from the medium tires. We weren't just seeing it with Hamilton. The other cars on medium tires, we saw that chunk of time where George Russell was losing time to Verstappen late stage until Verstappen's tires just went off the cliff. where Verstappen was making big headway into George Russell, who was on the medium tire. So I think if Ferrari just goes, this is the way it is, both the drivers are strategically minded. Leclerc and Hamilton at this stage, they're not the kind of drivers that are out for themselves. They're definitely trying to maximize the team result, and I think that's where the frustration comes in. And instead of chasing down a Mercedes to try and gain spots there, they were essentially stuck defending from Carlos Sainz, who was on a rush, on a good run, and kind of kept in the window of them because of their indecision. So Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton is definitely learning that Ferrari's still very weak on their strategy, and I think, unfortunately, that's about the only thing that they don't necessarily have control over from the cockpit, is when to make those switches and just, calling it out and getting it there. The team needs to be thinking of that, especially when you put your drivers on alternate strategies, which are designed to ebb and flow and converge and diverge as they go. As we start to get outside of the points, we'll go Racing Bulls. Isaac Hadjar still seems to be holding Liam Lawson kind of at bay. Lawson had a pretty good, kind of bounce back weekend in Jeddah the week before, and we were thinking maybe that's a sign of things to come, but he kind of fell back once again, and Hadjar's definitely kind of got stranglehold on the team. I think Liam Lawson is doing a bit better, but he's now, having to get very fighty in order to stay with it, as Liam Lawson involved in another crash this weekend. However, and I will rant this as I have so many times, the crash between Lawson and Alonso is a product of the change in the rules over the last couple of years that give so much excessive power to the car on the inside. And it is rules that kill the ability to race. So if you look, the contact in the sprint between Liam Lawson and Fernando Alonso into turn 12, the left-handed hairpin. I checked the onboard from Alonso. At the apex, Alonso had a half of a wheel ahead of Liam Lawson. So we're talking about a foot and change. But because he's on the inside and he's quote-unquote ahead at the apex, he then has the right to push Liam Lawson all the way to the edge of the track and cause a crash because Liam Lawson did not yield. Now, this is where I think the rule is really, really dumb. Liam Lawson had 99% of his car alongside the car next to him, and he's not allowed to be there. That is what is just inexplicable to me about the way the rules for racing have been adjusted and changed. If you're asking me what they should be, if the other car is significantly alongside, usually in league racing where we've written rules, we've qualified that as front wing alongside the front edge of the side pod, so you're have more than about 60-65% overlap, then you've got to give space to the car, and we don't specify whether it's inside or outside. The fact that they can't write a rule that just says, the fact that they write a rule that specifies one side where you have to be ahead to have any right to space versus the other side that if you're ahead, then therefore it is 100% yours. You can just drive them right off. And in fact, Liam Lawson got a 5-second penalty for that collision. So, rant on the current state of the rules over. That's, well, at least for now, because we'll certainly see it before the end of the season. And I always hate it. And it drives me crazy every time I see it. Okay, moving on. Next, we have Haas. And that car, came out of the gate strong. it has been sliding back through the field over the last couple of races, and that's kind of typical of Haas. They don't really develop their car all that much throughout the year. They typically are, kind of show up, maybe have one early upgrade, and go. I'm hoping that with the Toyota partnership and Io Komatsu as the team principal, that they could start to change that and get some more forward momentum. But also part of that is money, and Gene Haas, controls the purse strings, and he's always typically not been a guy to spend a lot of money on that team, unfortunately. But we'll see. Maybe the Toyota partnership throwing some extra money into the ring will hopefully give them the ability to develop the car, especially with the 2026 regulations coming in, and try and get that team moving forward. As far as the drivers go, Esteban Ocon has been a pretty good measuring stick for how a car's been performing. He's a veteran driver and has been one of those solid midfield drivers. So he's usually a pretty good measurement that you can put rookies up against. Oliver Behrman, he's been doing all right. He'll need to close the gap, I think, in order to secure himself a more permanent seat. I don't know what his contract is. I don't know if he's already confirmed for next season or not. But he's going to have to close the gap to his teammate and show a little bit more pace, I think, if he wants to retain that seat. Otherwise, it'll probably become, the next Ferrari Junior that needs a drive. That's probably going to go into that Haas car, especially with, Sauber going fully Audi. That's going to really take a lot of, obviously, it's going to take Ferrari's control over their kind of driver selection out of Ferrari's hands, where they've also typically put their Ferrari juniors. Leclerc came from Sauber. He drove through them with Alfa Romeo. So I'm hoping to see Haas. I believe they have a decent upgrade coming for Imola. Considering Haas's usual trajectory, I would expect that that's probably going to be one of their last upgrades for the year, just based on how they typically do it. So we'll see if they're able to get the car back into that upper midfield fight. But it isn't, for as close as the margins are, it does seem to be a clear stratification between the top 5 and the bottom 5 cars. Williams having penetrated into that top 5 set of cars now, as they, like I said, arguably could be ahead of Ferrari at this stage. Next up, we'll go to Alpine. Gasly had some heroic drives early in the season, but that team is starting to come back down to earth a little bit, as they, did not look all that impressive over the Miami weekend. We'll see if they find, if it was a one-off, if they find some stride as we hit the European leg of the races, or if that team really is kind of falling apart at the seams. Of course, they will not be making engines for 2026. They will only be making chassis. They're taking Mercedes engines, and the whole behind-the-scenes fiasco with their team principal that went on last week, I won't get too far into it, but Oliver Oakes resigned and is out, and it looks to be kind of on the pressures of Flavio Briatore. And Flavio Briatore technically not allowed to be team principal, so I think they've got somebody else that is kind of their acting TP. But it's, it's hard not to see Flavio's fingerprints kind of on what's going on. And of course, the other news that came out, Jack Doohan out after 6 races. He is done. Franco Colapinto, who spent some time at the end of last year in the Williams, will be taking over that seat, but is only on a 5-race deal. So hopefully that extends and they give him some time to actually, figure it out. Otherwise, Alpine's starting to make their second seat look like the team principal's office, where it's just constantly changing. Next up, Sauber, as we continue towards the back of the grid, had some bright spots as Nico Hülkenberg made Q2 in the sprint qualifying. Gabriel Bortoleto making Q2 in the Grand Prix. But otherwise, the car, is not looking all that good. I mean, we've talked about it a lot already this year. Sauber, I'm sure, is just kind of buying time till Audi takes it over. In fact, the further down they are, it kind of benefits them, as they will have more wind tunnel time the lower they finish down the Constructors' Championship. So it's more time for Audi to work on the car. But we'll have to see if they have anything. Bortoleto, a rookie driver up against a very experienced Nico Hülkenberg. So much like the Haas situation, where it's a very good measuring stick. It is still, though, hard to get a true measurement when the car is not very good. Because, when the car's not good, it's unpredictable, and sometimes you'll have amazing results, and sometimes you'll not. Whereas some drivers can really shine in a better car right away because it's predictable and it goes where you want it to and doesn't try and kill you every time you go into a corner, like some of the lower grid cars can do, which is typically why they're lower on the grid. So yeah, Bortoleto's shown some flashes of good pace overall, but he's not really shown up that much in Grand Prix. And I think, especially an Audi project that has expressed interests to be at the front of the grid, Bortoleto, much like Behrman, is going to have to kind of show up and show out in order to really, get involved with retaining that seat. And lastly, in fact, I didn't even write it down, Aston Martin, just a real not great weekend. That car looks real bad. I don't know off the top of my head what their upgrade trajectory is. Of course, I'm sure a lot of the team is kind of waiting for the Newey effect to kick in. I believe based on his contract and gardening leave, he has no input into the 2025 car at all. He's basically full steam ahead on the 2026 car. So we'll see how patient Fernando Alonso is. He's not a spring chicken. And I'm sure at this point, he's probably just waiting to see what the 2026 car is going to look like. They do take Mercedes engines. There's rumors that Mercedes is looking to be at, the power unit to beat for the 2026 regulations. But of course, it's all speculation and rumors. Nobody's actually releasing that information yet. And it's more kind of the insider hubbub and hoorah and whatnot. So that's kind of the roundup after Miami. Let's go ahead and talk about Imola here, as I'll drive us slowly down the front straight here, and we'll get to where's pole position? Is it on the inside or the outside? I can never remember. I want to say it's on the inside, well, the left side. I believe it's on the left side, but like I said, I never remember. In fact, they've got all these grid boxes all the way down, so I don't remember exactly where the start is for here, but it is a decent run down to turn quote-unquote 2. You have that little leftward kink, and then you are on the brakes into the Tamburello chicane. Nice left-right-left combination. When you're single file, it's pretty high speed, but when you're bunched up and having to leave space for cars on the inside, it can get a little awkward. Later in the race, it's a fantastic spot to see the change of direction, especially these last two corners, because once you hit this left-hander here, cars are flat out, and it's a pretty sharp angle at full speed. But it's a decent overtaking opportunity. It's really the only big one on the track because it's down the only DRS zone. So then you have a short little blast down into Variante Villeneuve. The second chicane, it's kind of unique. Most chicanes, you're hard on the brakes, slowed down, you drive through the first part, and then you're kind of on the gas through the second part. This one, when we go through for the faster laps, you'll see it's actually a much shallower turn. The first part, you're on the brakes again to get the car slowed down for this second right-hander. Very much a single lane kind of part, but if you can really close up to the gap and use the exit you are down into Tosa, the left-handed hairpin that kind of goes up the hill. There's a bit of banking in this corner. It is an overtaking opportunity if you have a decent tire advantage. You can kind of, because of the banking, you can work the outside angle a little bit, but usually you're going to see drivers dive up the inside on their way into that left-hander if they are making that. Typically, if we're going to see moves through Tosa there, it's going to be when, if somebody's on a significant tire offset, if they've come in to grab a faster set of tires and are having to pick their way through some of the others. Then you're up the hill and into a high-speed double left-hander called Piratella. You really get the car rotated here on this first one. Once you see this outer curb, you're going to see drivers really work. You may see drivers go wide and get over track limits in qualifying, but then you're full throttle on the second part of the left-hander and you're down the hill, a fantastic elevation change into the famous Acqua Minerale. In qualifying, you might see drivers take this first right-hander full throttle and then really haul on the brakes, because then you have to really get the car slowed down and rotated as you transition to this uphill. Use a lot of this exit curbing here to get up the hill. And it does give you, if you can make it work, a pretty good run. Really not an overtaking opportunity because of that quick right-hander. And it's a pretty short run into the next chicane, the highest point of the track and aptly named Variante Alta, or the tall chicane. You'll see drivers take a lot of this curb in order to try and kind of straight line the chicane. It's relatively manageable, though you will see, in the slow-mo shots, especially if they take a little more than they expected, cars go all four wheels off the ground there, which is kind of amusing. Then you are on the way to the last two corners, which at the exact moment, the names of these two left-handers is escaping me. And I don't know why. Maybe I'll remember when I go for a faster lap. But we'll go ahead and come around, and this is kind of your lead on to the long straight. The DRS zone starts just near where the pit entry is, and away you go. I think that P1 actually starts right under this gantry, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it's this left grid box. So if I remember right, then it should be right about there. But it's awkward. There's this little bit of a curve in the start of the track, but you can see pretty long run down to turn one. This is technically turn one, this left-handed king. Turn two, sorry. Tamburello. But so we'll go for a little quicker lap as we talk about tire strategy that's going to be coming in. So last year, Imola had the softer three compounds, the C3, C4, C5, which was the softest set of compounds, same as you'd see in Monaco and Singapore. This year, Pirelli has debuted a C6. Obviously, the bigger number, the softer the tire. And this weekend will be the debut of the C6 tire in a race weekend. It's a regular Grand Prix weekend. But last year and the years before, when it's been dry, it's been a pretty consistent one stop. Obviously, the tires, even though being very soft, they hold up well enough. And the other factors being only one DRS zone, making it very hard to overtake around this track, and a very long pit lane. You can see the pit entrance is there. And as I come all the way around here, the pit exit is there. So it covers a significant portion of the pit straight where, well, you want to be going really quick. And unfortunately, you're going really, really slow in the pit lane. So again, those all factor into why teams have, even if it's been tougher on the tires, still opted for the one-stop strategy. It'll be interesting because last year, teams that started on the C5 tire, the soft tire that year, what will be the medium tire this year, all drivers that started on that C5 had to do a two-stop strategy. So now that the C5 is the medium tire, will we be able to see that medium hard? It's a little bit up in the air, personally, I think, because we have seen the cars are able to take the tires longer this year. They seem to be a little easier on the tires. And even races where we've seen, two stops in the past where they've been, on tires that usually get beat up, we've seen them be able to do one stop. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see kind of a boring one-stop strategy race playing out here. So brace yourself for that. Qualifying is going to be very important. And we'll see what the C6 can do. Even ahead of the race, Pirelli is saying they don't expect to see anybody using the C6 in the race. It should be a very fast qualifying tire, but it likely will just get absolutely beat up in the race. So, of course, storylines, the McLaren battle is going to be important to pay attention to, especially around a track where qualifying is important. Lando Norris has had kind of the edge on Oscar when it comes to qualifying, but Oscar's been kind of catching that up himself. Maybe we see, another opportunity for Red Bull, another track where you can't really get by the other car. Does Max Verstappen put that car on pole and is able to defend the entire rest of the race? Certainly on the cards for him. It's a quasi-home race for Ferrari because it is in Italy. There's usually a pretty healthy component of the Tifosi out there, as I really screwed up that exit. It was on a really good lap, actually, but got a little swapper. So Ferrari is going to want to show up and impress. That's honestly, I think, why they're bringing some of the upgrades to Imola as opposed to waiting a couple of weeks for Spain. We'll see what Yuki Tsunoda can continue to do. Can he continue to catch up to Verstappen and show that he's worth it in that car? And, Mercedes is always going to be there or thereabouts. It is a home race for Kimi Antonelli, an Italian kid. So I'm sure he'll be wanting to follow up his sprint qualifying pole performance and show what he's made of in front of a friendly home crowd. But it's back to another standard race weekend, so three practices, 2 on Friday, 1 on Saturday morning, and then qualifying Saturday morning. I think qualifying is about 7 a.m. Pacific time, and then Grand Prix on Sunday. So it's nice to get back to it. Triple header will be quite busy. And of course, there is the ever-looming technical directive waiting just a couple of weeks away in Spain. So we'll see if that has any impact on the running order. Of course, last year, Red Bull won the first 6 of the first 7 races and looked pretty invincible, much like McLaren is now. Does another team have the McLaren kind of jump in them to catch up to McLaren? And do we see McLaren really just kind of put, well, forgive the car pun, but their foot on the gas and really just hold the rest of the field down and leave it a race for second place? I mean, Miami, it certainly looked like it was a race for second place. Whereas, last year, Miami was Lando's first win. So there was definitely signs of that car improving. So it'll be interesting. It's always an interesting track. Definitely some cool things to see the cars going around it, but not a very good overtaking track. So it's possible that it might not be the most thrilling race of all time. But I will catch you guys next time. Y'all take it easy. Peace.